the Transit Working Group meeting for August 27th, 2020. We could do a call to order, just have everybody who has joined us as a attendee, if you could just unmute and say your name quickly.
Davida Mueller.
John Hallbaker.
Anna Cassidy.
Jonathan Crowe.
Nicholson.
Christine Byler.
Catherine Skinner.
Jim DeGrood.
Carolyn Laurie with PAG.
Jamie Brown with PAG.
It looks like we have a few more joined us here. Okay, I'm just making sure we have a quorum. I believe we do. I'm looking for representative from City of Tucson. Oh, I see Chris Blue, you're online now.
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm having some audio issues. Can you hear me?
Chris, are you able to unmute and introduce yourself?
Blue, Chris, I can hear you okay. I'm not sure. James, do you hear Chris?
Hello.
And we have Jason from Paskayaki. Jason, are you able to hear me and unmute?
Yes, this is Jason. Can you hear me? Hello?
Hi, this is Catherine Mitchell. Both Jason and Chris, we can both hear you. I'm not sure if James is able to.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
James,
thanks,
can you hear me?
Catherine.
Okay, well, I'm assuming that you will be, we're just trying to make sure that everybody who needs to ask questions is able to. So I just wanted to make sure that Chris Blue from City of Tucson and Jason Bay from Paskayaki were both able to. Okay, so I'm getting a notification that that looks like everybody can hear me okay, and I'm not sure why my audio is not coming through. Let me try really quickly to disconnect and reconnect, and hopefully that will resolve the issue. So give me just a moment. Apologies. Okay, I'm back. Can everybody hear me okay?
Hi, James, this is Crystal. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Chris Blue, are you still there? Do you want to see if James can hear you and then we can move on?
I'm here. James, can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Apologies for that.
Great.
Must have been something with my connection. And then I just wanted to make sure that
This is
Jason is-
Jason.
Grace.
Can you hear
all
me?
right. Yes, thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. Okay.
All right.
All right, so give me 1 second. And, okay. Okay, can everybody see the slides okay?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so I appreciate that. Sorry we worked through those technical details. We'll move on to our in-kind form. This is the document where we record in-kind contributions from anyone who is not paid in federal dollars. If you are not paid in federal dollars, we do want to try to record your time here that we can use as in-kind match. We can provide you with a way to provide that information to us at a later point. Okay, our first order of business is the FY 22-26 Regional Transit Funding Programming Overview. In the packet that was posted online, hopefully everybody was able to find the information regarding that memo, and also the attached TIP Planning Committee memo from August 12th from Carolyn Laurie. Did everybody find that okay and has had a chance to review that material? Okay, I'm just going to assume you have. So a quick overview. This is our annual process or process that we do in coordination with the development of the TIP. This year is a full TIP development cycle for the FY 22-26 TIP. And the notification that went out August 12th was the official notice of funding for that's relevant to this group. That memo outlines the funding that's available for Federal Transit Administration 5307, 5339, and STVG Flex funding. And just a quick overview of how we typically handle that process. The funding that's available that was in that memo, we would request that any eligible jurisdictions who would like to apply for that funding fill out an application that we'll provide to you after the meeting. We will need to have that application back to us, submitted with all the projects that we need to consider by September 11th. The way that we have traditionally moved to this is that once we get that project list, we will go ahead and put those into a document that gives us both what our fiscal constraint will be, whether we're over programmed or under programmed in any given year. Then we'll work with the committee to prioritize those projects based on criteria that we've developed in the past as prioritization criteria that we've developed and used in prior years. The amount of funding that we assume is available is based on the prior year FTA apportioned amount. So in this case, we'll be using that same apportioned amount for all 5 years and programming the TIP. In the future, if we find that we're either under programmed or over programmed based on those apportionments, we can make adjustments at that time. So again, we will be looking for those submissions to us by September 11th, and we will provide you the application via email after the meeting. Any questions regarding this process? Oh, and one other thing I forgot to mention. Our goal is to have this prioritized and adopted for recommendation to PAG's management and board by our council. We need to have that completed by November. So we've got a couple of months to work through that, September and October. Potentially, if we have to move into our November meeting, we can probably make that work as well. But ideally, we try to get these finished by the October meeting. Any questions there?
Hi, James. This is Chris Blue.
Hi, Chris.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Again.
It would be helpful if you could send out the packet and the agenda as PDF attachments in an email rather than as links to the documents. Unfortunately, I missed the link to the packet because I was looking for a PDF attachment. So would that be possible in the future that you could do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. That'd be great. With the amount of emails we get daily, it's things can get lost in the mix, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of moved more to doing links just because sometimes the packets are very large and some people have issues receiving large email attachments. But we can certainly do that if attachment would work better. Okay, any other questions regarding this process? All right, if not, we can move on to the next item. This is the Sun Shuttle RTA funded services analysis and planning. Okay, so several months ago, we had discussed the Route 410 and some of the challenges that route was experiencing in terms of declining ridership. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the 410 statistics, why we are looking to make this change, why we think there may be an issue with the current schedule on the 410. We'll be discussing a recommended service change, and we'll also talk about some of the public feedback that we received when we reached out to talk to current riders using the system. And finally, we'll look at a timeline if this change is approved, when we would believe that would be implemented. So a really quick review of the operating standards for the Sun Shuttle system that was adopted by this group several years ago. Our goal for any of our Sun Shuttle routes are as follows: the passengers per hour greater or equal to 4 passengers per hour, the subsidy being less than 13, and the fare box ratio being greater than 3%. As you can see here, the Route 410 has experienced declining ridership. Now, I want to make clear that this has been a trend across not only the Sun Shuttle system, but also across the regional systems such as SunTran, and really nationwide. Transit ridership has been seeing some decline, but the Route 410 has particularly seen some declines in ridership. And I want to note here that I don't believe this is the right numbers for this. I think for some reason what we're seeing here is actually the full system number, so I apologize for that. But I'll get that amended and sent out for the actual 410 numbers. I didn't catch that when I was reviewing these slides, my apologies. But here we can see the Route 410 as it relates to the other routes. You'll see that for FY20, the Route 410 only had 3,000 boardings for the entire year. Compare that to some of our busier routes that were over 10,000 or even over 20,000 ridership for the year. And then the passengers per hour, you can see that we're only at this point, we're only transporting about 1 passenger per hour. Also, the subsidy per passenger is very, very high on the 410. So the overall service cost, because this route is so long, is very, very high. And the return that we're getting on this route is very, very low. This is a rural route, and we do receive FTA funding in the form of 5311 rural transportation funding. So, the region is not carrying the full cost of this route. However, it's still worth noting that anything we can do to try to boost the ridership would be, obviously beneficial. The 410 is in a very, as I mentioned, in a very rural area, and we do consider that to some extent to be a lifeline service for this area. But, being that as it may, we want to try to do the best we can to provide the best service on this route for the customers. Again, just another view at the boardings. If you see, these have been declining over time the last 3 fiscal years. This is the route as it's currently oriented. As you can see, it does meander around quite a bit in the Marana and Upper Valley area. It's right now it's operating at an hour and a half headway, which is really pretty much the minimum that most transit can be considered to be acceptable in terms of really being viable for people. Any more than that, and it starts to be very, very difficult to plan your day around a route that's greater than an hour and a half. An hour and a half is already pretty challenging for a lot of folks. If you miss your bus for whatever reason, you're waiting an hour and a half for the next one, and that's really just very challenging. It can completely derail any sort of plans you might have had. So let's take a quick look at the productivity by stop, and this will be relevant when we're talking about the rerouting. Several of the stops obviously carry the majority of the boarding. Stops 1, 2, and 3 on the western end of the route. And then most people are using stop A. That's primarily because that's where the transfer point is to the Route 413 for folks who want to connect to the rest of the Sun Shuttle system or the Suntran system from that point. We do know that a lot of the customers just use the Route 410 and just travel only on the Route 410, go to destinations served by the 410, but a lot of them are transferring. So we're seeing that those stops 1, 2, and 3, where people are getting picked up and getting out there to the Route 413. One stop in particular that we want to note here is stop 4. You'll notice that there is of these stops that are on this map, stop 4 is very, very low at only 3% or 2% of boardings and 3% of alightings. And I do want to mention really quickly that this data that we're looking at comes from the technology that we're currently using, which is TripShot. And we've discussed TripShot. That's a technology that our contractor is using to track ridership at this point. We have moved exclusively to the TripShot system after some troubleshooting of the app in prior months, where we were getting some irregular data from the paper tracking system versus the app. We have resolved that, but some of this data that you see here still reflects a little bit of those. This is a full year's worth of data and boarding. So some of the, especially some of the alightings are a little bit off, which is why I think maybe stop 3 looks a little bit skewed. If you move to more recent months, the boardings and alightings on stop 3 are a little bit closer. But they still are, the alightings on stop 3 are still higher, which would indicate to me that people are either getting rides to places and then using the Sun Shuttle to come back to stop 3, or some variation on that theme. But we have been verifying the ridership data. If you go back and look at the ridership data from our previous collection method, which was a paper-based method, and look at prior years, the boarding and alighting patterns that you see here for the different stops are pretty consistent with that as well. So while we may be off a little bit in some of these months, we don't feel like that we're very far off in terms of these ratios, in terms of the percentages on and off for these particular stops. So something that I wanted to highlight here, and this is really important, the reason and the real driver behind what we're trying to do in terms of the reroute is really comes down to these 2 stops. So you saw this stop 1 and stop 2 being 2 of our highest ridership stops. So these are obviously very important to our customers who use the 410. A couple of, or last year, or maybe the year before, I can't remember the exact date, but we realigned the schedule to try to keep us more on time. We were having a lot of trouble with keeping this route on time. It's a very long route, and we really needed to make sure that we were meeting that transfer point with the 413 and not holding up the 413 and creating a cascading on-time problem throughout the system. So to address that, we came up with this essentially going from stop 1 or stop 2 in an alternating pattern. And what you can see that created was essentially a 3-hour headway for both stop 1 and stop 2. And I talked about the importance of headway a little bit earlier, but what was happening here is on 2 of our highest ridership stops, we'd created a 3-hour headway. noticing that this was probably part of the contribution to the declining ridership, we wanted to try to address this and try to serve those customers at those higher ridership stops better. And so in response to that, we took a look at the route and tried to figure out where we could reroute to save time, but also continue to serve those higher ridership stops. So at our last meeting, we had talked about a couple of alternatives. One of them included stop 3 on the new route. One of them did not. We put both of those options out to the public. We'll talk a little bit about the public feedback later, but most people who responded seemed to be okay with the reroute. We did decide that we wanted to keep stop 3, and I'll touch on that now. So this is the potential reroute. And what you'll see is that the only stop that ends up getting dropped in this scenario, now we do lose some of the flag area on the Trico Sanders stretch, but not all of it. And we do lose that current stop 4. But as I mentioned earlier, stop 4 is really only 2 to 3% of the overall boardings. What we did retain with this routing is the ability to serve stop 3, which on this reroute map has become stop 2. You'll notice this kind of strange jog down at Anway and Avra Valley, where we go down to stop 3 and then we head back north and go over to that stop 4. The reason behind that was really a safety reason. We could have theoretically turned left straight onto Avra Valley off of Anway from stop 3, but there is that's a pretty high-speed corridor through there. There's a blind curve, and our operators did not feel like they were comfortable making that left turn. There's no light, and the cross east-west traffic does not stop. So the solution was to go up, go down to where the stop 4 is there, and that gives us a straightaway that's much cleaner. There's no street. It's not a 4-way. It's only a 3-way. So it just felt a lot safer for the operators and the passengers to do that. You'll note here we have one stop that is unnumbered at Avra Valley and Sanders. That's potentially an optional stop. There's not a whole lot around that stop in terms of development, but there are a few things. So it may be worth adding that as one of our optional stops, which means it's not a time point, but we would stop there. There would be signs there in case customers wanted to use that. What this map doesn't show is what would be flag area and what would not be flag area. We would likely continue having the flag area everywhere it is now. On Cosio, on El Tiro, on Anway. We would not have the flag area on Avra Valley because that's, again, it's a high-speed road. There's not good shoulders. There's not safe places to pull off and then rejoin the traffic flow. But we would look at having, again, that flag area on Swanson and then everywhere else along there that we currently have that. Any questions to this point? I've been talking a lot, so I want to make sure that people have an opportunity to ask questions if we're.
James, this is Davida Mueller.
Hi, Davida.
Good morning. Are there places along Avra Valley Way that you would add other stops? Is there, I know there's, it's a long road that doesn't have a lot, but in the places it does, they tend to be commercial areas. So are you looking to add a couple more stops in that long segment?
This question. We don't have any proposed at this point, but we do have some flexibility to potentially add one. I think we did kind of talk about that a little bit with our contractor, and they didn't see anywhere in particular that seemed like a spot to want to add one. But one challenge that we are facing is it's still a very long route, and we are still, we want to make sure we can keep the route at an hour-and-a-half headway for all stops. So if we were able to add a stop and to keep our layovers, keep our drivers with the ability to take breaks, then we would do that. But yeah, something we can certainly look at before we finalize the route is if there is a place along there where it might make sense.
Or you can wait until the community, once they see the vehicle traveling there, you might get a request after that asking for a specific location.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's a good approach, is to just introduce the service and see if there's any feedback from the community at that point.
James, this is Jim. It occurs to me that it would add about 2 miles to the path, but if you were to continue east on Avra Valley, close to Sundario, you could serve the Avra Valley Airport. Or I guess it's called Marana Northwest. I don't know what the current name of it is, but it might be worth looking at, and perhaps even just a simple call to the fixed base operator out there to get a sense of whether or not they felt that there would be any benefit to their employees. It might be worth a call.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think that's a good suggestion. Again, I think the only challenge with that would just be to, can we get out to the airport and back and maintain that hour and a half? I mean, but that's certainly, if it's a potential high boarding stop, then yeah, we definitely want to think about ways we could do that. One thing that's worth noting is, and I'll go back here, the stops 7 and 8 don't have a huge amount of boardings either. And so it may be that we could, talk to customers out there. We're trying to not, eliminate stops as much as we can. But if we were to come up and see that there are other high value stops that might be more beneficial to the route, and we could save time by not going out to that Adonis and Greer 7 and 8 area, that would be some way that we could trim some time out of the schedule and accommodate something like a stop at the airport. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the public feedback. We did send out surveys, both notifications in the vehicle. We had a paper survey that we had available in the vehicle. We also had an online survey that they could go, and once they had that paper survey, they could go and take it online if they wished. We don't have a lot of folks who use this, and I wish we'd gotten more feedback, but we only ended up getting 7 survey responses, which, relative to probably the number of people that we serve, is fairly indicative of who uses it. 5 of the respondents indicated that the reroute would work for them. 2 said that they did not want the route to change. However, of those 2, there was only 1 who indicated that the reroute would completely prohibit them from continuing to ride. This gentleman uses right now they're boarding close to stop 4 along Trico Marana. We did reach out to them via email to see if there was some opportunity for them to continue using the route if they were able to get to stop 6, for example. They indicated that they do use the route to transfer to the 413 and continue on. So if they were able to get from their current boarding location to stop 6, which, to be fair, is about 2 miles along Trico Marana, which is, if they were forced to walk, that's not a super friendly pedestrian environment. But of the feedback we have, that was the only person who indicated that they would not be able to continue using the route if the change were to be implemented. And then the other point that I thought was salient for this was that 40% of the respondents indicated that they do transfer during their trip, which is important in terms of making sure that this route meets the 413 on time, and that we allow people to make that transfer and continue on to the larger system. I did think it was interesting in terms of who did respond, how many do not end up transferring, but that was the feedback that we received. So the timeline, if approved today, this routing realignment would go into effect in early November. We would provide both the realignment and the schedule, which Suntran has already worked on with us, and our contractor has indicated that the schedule that Suntran provided would work for them. So we know that this is feasible. The contractor did several on-the-ground timings of the route using supervisor support. We know that it works. We know that it would work for the drivers. It's been vetted for safety, along with that change route at stop 3. And we do believe that this would provide a much higher level of functionality for those folks at stops, the current stops 1 and 2, because they wouldn't have that 3-hour headway anymore, and they would be moved back to the 1.5 hour. So given that, our recommended action today is for the group to approve the Sun Shuttle Route 410 route realignment. But before we ask for that, we would certainly want to take a discussion.
Hey, James, this is Jonathan.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hi. So I don't doubt that that's a smarter route, but 7 responses is extremely low. And I'd be a little concerned about making a decision based on such a low response rate. And I'm wondering if there's any other efforts that could be done to reach out to the actual riders to gauge the impacts of the route change.
Yes, potentially. We found that it was really, really hard to get feedback from this group. We left the surveys on the vehicles for over a month, trying to make sure that people had an opportunity to see them. It's difficult to kind of take a hold of fixed route passengers just because we don't have any sort of database contact information for them. But yeah, and I agree, we would like to have gotten more responses than we did. Absolutely. The one thing in the positive is that the majority of the folks who came back seemed like they would still be fine with the route. 6 out of the 7 would still be fine taking the travel that they currently do. But yeah, the only challenge we're up against here is that if we don't move the route forward as today, then we will miss our window to hit this to hit this bid change. Now, that doesn't mean that we couldn't do it later. It just means that we wouldn't be able to have the route in the Google system. So the route wouldn't show up as being any different in Google. But we could, in terms of changing the maps and things like that, we could delay it if we had to.
James, can you clarify what you meant by the map not showing up in Google? I don't understand that issue.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, we rely on Suntran to program the stops into the general transit feed specification, which is the GTFS system. That's if you want your route to show up on Google Maps. So if you were looking for stops near you on Google Maps, if you typed in transit, or if you used any of the apps that use Google Maps for their back end, so the transit app, for example, they're relying on that information from operators being programmed on a regular basis to update the system maps. Suntran does that prior to their bid change, and Davida, feel free to jump in and if I'm saying anything incorrectly, but they have a deadline where they need to be able to submit all of that information to Google, so that change will be reflected in time for the actual route to be implemented. Now, if we were to miss that window, we could, of course, print schedules later. All of our booklets are printed separately, so we could none of them are going to set to expire, so we could print that route material later. There wouldn't be any issue operationally with delaying the change. But the only thing we wouldn't be able to do is have that route. We would have to wait until the next period of programming that GTFS data for the route to show up any differently in the on Google Maps. Now that wouldn't affect our application that we use for our customers, which is TripShot. TripShot can make those changes whenever we need them to. So any customer who's using our TripShot app wouldn't be affected. But anyone who is just using a generic transit app or looking for transit stops online wouldn't be able to see those changes until the next cycle.
You
And
know when the
James,
next cycle is, James, for Google Update?
Davida, do you happen to know when that next cycle would be?
our cycle would be after November would be February. But it will be available if we delay it, customers, and we get it into our system. Customer service would be able to help people. Your app would be able to help people. It would be people that rely on Bing or Apple Maps or Google Maps that would not have the correct information.
Right. Yeah. So TripShot, which is what we offer customers to see real-time updates on where our vehicles are, would not be affected. And again, as Davida mentioned, if someone called in and asked questions, so we could make a we could probably put something in a brochure that would say, for accurate Sun Shuttle information, please refer to TripShot. But I don't know how much the customers out there rely on using Google Maps. I would assume that a lot of them, because this route has been configured the way it is for so long, are, they kind of know where the route is. And one thing that we would want to make sure is that, when we implemented this, that we did as much outreach on the vehicles as we can to make sure people know that the routing is changing. So, that would, of course, entail some communication that said, hey, if you can, download the TripShot app if you're able to, but at the very least, here's the new brochure, here's the new routing, be aware that this is coming. So if there is significant concern that we need to do more customer outreach, and we can do that. But so Jonathan, you were asking what would be the repercussions from not moving forward. It's essentially just that Google update.
Thanks, James. I guess one other suggestion is that instead of making this a permanent change that we vote on and it's a done deal, could we do a trial period for a couple weeks or whatever and see what the feedback is before we get all excited and print it?
I suppose we could do that, run it as a pilot. I'm a little hesitant to do that just because I don't think we typically do that in the region in terms of changing routes and then changing them back. I hate the confusion that could potentially cause for customers. I don't think it's a bad idea in terms of, this is a complicated area. It's really hard to serve, and that's certainly something we want to acknowledge. Although I think if we want to try to get more feedback, I would almost rather just leave the route as it is and try to get that feedback if we can, and then when we're comfortable making that change, we go ahead and do it. I think the only other drawback to not doing it the way you're suggesting is that, again, customers at stop 1 and 2, the current stop 1 and 2 would continue to have that 3-hour headway if we kept it as is. Any other thoughts on doing it as a pilot? Davida, I know that Suntran doesn't typically do that type of thing, but I'm curious, you guys do more changes than we do. What are your thoughts on doing something like that?
Well, one of the things that if you went forward and did it for a short period, maybe we could do it just from February or from November to February. You could do a trial that way. Regardless of if you do it for a couple weeks, for a couple of months, or 6 months, you still need to print materials, because even when if we have an error in the ride guide, or if we do something short term, we still print a strip card or some kind of notification so that people have something in their hand that the website reflects it. And if it's like a long-term detour, like what we have right now around the Tucson Convention Center, we actually are changing the route because it won't be changed until that construction is not going to be done until March. So from November till February, the ride guide is going to reflect that detour. And then we'll make another written document. But regardless of how we do it, Jonathan, I would recommend some printed stuff. But the other thing that you could do right now is maybe put up maps on each of those. It won't help you for the flag areas, but places where you have those stops, you could put maps or information with maybe Luce or Cindy could jump in, where you put in like a Survey Monkey link for somebody to contact either you or customer service or even marketing to get more feedback in the next, well, we're running out of time, but in the next couple of weeks.
Mhm.
But it
So-
would,
You were saying on the current routing, go ahead and try to continue doing some of that outreach.
well, whether you change the route or not, you want to continue outreach through from now till November to just let people know that that change is happening. That's what we will be doing. But if you're to address Jonathan's concern, if you're trying to get more input, I still think you need to put signs up all over the place. So as somebody's walking past it or driving past it, what's going on? It might trigger some more comments. Either way, you're going to need to do outreach between now and November.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we would certainly expect outreach if we, were to implement a change, as much as we can on the vehicles and then at the signs. I think, I mean, that's in terms of letting people know that the change was coming, and those printed materials if we were to make a change. I suppose, so my ton of two priorities here are, obviously making sure that those customers at the current stops 1 and 2 get better service as soon as possible. But yeah, not coming at the detriment of other customers. And again, we're not taking service away from any of the stops except for 4. And having that be that lower boarding area. I'm certainly open to doing it as a trial period, and seeing what kind of feedback we would get. Any other
James?
thoughts from the group on that?
James, this is Chris Blue. Could you go back to the table showing the number of boardings and alightings?
Yeah, and,
James, this
mind
is
this-
Jonathan again.
Sure. Jonathan.
Based on the discussion, I'm okay with moving forward on this one now, but couple with the provision that if we get a lot of feedback after it's implemented that it's not working, that we need to go back to the drawing board. And then second follow-up question is, do you have any indication of what the ridership has been during COVID in the last few months? Has it dropped significantly?
And I apologize because this slide was supposed to show you that, and there was an error in me obviously copying this over, and it ended up with the full system ridership. But when I was looking at this data, so what you see at the bottom there is the full Sun Shuttle ridership, and you can see the obvious drop in April and May, and then it's been picking up a little bit in June and July, and the 410 has somewhat mirrored that. In fact, I didn't, there was some drop off, but it actually wasn't as surprising as I thought it would be. I think a lot of the folks that use the 410 need the 410, and that they didn't really have a choice of doing something else. So while we have had some impact from COVID, it wasn't as I don't think it was as pronounced as on some of the other routes. If you give me just a second, I may be able to pull it up here and give you some numbers. You won't be able to see them, but I can at least tell you what they are based on the data I can see off screen. Okay, here we go. Just a second. All right, so to give you an idea, so February of 2020, we were at 257 boardings. In March, we were at 208. Actually, in April and May, we saw 237, 268, and then June, 297, and then in July, 291. So if anything, we haven't really seen. Now that's a little lower than where we had been earlier at the end of last year, where we were averaging around probably closer to 350, 400. But some of those declines were coming prior to COVID sort of affecting the transit system, and it really doesn't look like it's affected the 410 nearly as. In fact, it almost looks like it's barely affected it at all if you look at February and March. Versus April, May, and then in June and July, we're back up to close to 300. So yeah, I would say there's been a little bit of a drop off, but it may have already kind of been happening. But yeah, again, not as severe as some of the other routes. But hi,
I'm
yes.
sorry. This is Davida again. What you're looking at right now, can you see it by stop? Can you see how low that stop at number 4 is on your numbers right there in front of you?
I would have to look at a different chart.
Okay.
And again, this number that you're seeing here is aggregate of the entire year. So August to August for the 410. But you can tell at stop 4, that's only 74 boardings for the entire year, August to August. It's pretty low. I mean, that's not even a boarding per day. So.
James, this is Cindy with Suntran. Interesting enough, the ridership during COVID, we had done some outreach on this route in particular with some mailers. We wanted to test the area to see what sort of feedback we'd get, so that if this route did change, we could potentially use that same system. Again, a marketing tactic for these folks, because the area is so sporadic. Going back to Davida's question about signage, it's very difficult to communicate with the riders in this area. But possibly, maybe riding the shuttle in order to get some additional feedback if that's necessary. But it would seem that the folks that have responded to the survey might be all of the riders, or at least close to. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, I don't know that they're all. I mean, I have to imagine we have more than 7 to generate this kind of, the ridership numbers that we do. Although I suppose it's not infeasible that 7 people could generate some of the numbers that we're seeing.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we're talking about a fairly small group, no matter what.
Yeah.
And I don't know what we can do to communicate. One thing that I would like to know is if some of the drop off that we've seen in ridership is due to that decline in stop or those longer headways on 1 and 2, and if we can communicate with folks in those areas that we're trying to bring more frequent service back to them, if that would have some impact on their decision to ride or not.
On the slide that you showed with the times, it didn't have new proposed times as well, or you don't have that, do you? Those are the current times?
We do have a draft timetable, but I don't have it in this presentation. But 1 and 2 have moved back to an hour and a half headway.
Okay.
On the draft proposal. And I didn't include it just because it's sometimes challenging to look at these schedules on a presentation and really make much of them.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments on this? And so it sounds like we've got some consensus around moving forward with the recommendation with the understanding that we will try to we'll obviously make any communication about the change as prevalent as possible. And with that communication, we will include some information about how, if this change isn't working for you, we'd like to hear from you, so that we could make some, as Jonathan said, we can go back, try to make some adjustments if needed. Again, some other, as I mentioned earlier, some other possibilities would be, there may be some other possibilities for changing the routing in terms of 7 and 8. So we might want to think about talking to, if we can get a hold of folks who use stops 7 and 8. I have a feeling that, given that their boardings are roughly around the same as stop 4, that they're going to have the same kind of feedback if 7 and 8 were to go away, that that they would no longer be able to use the service. But we can look at some other options if we hear a lot of feedback from the community that this is detrimental to them.
James, it's Chris with the city. I move that we approve these changes with the recommendations that were discussed today.
Okay, we have.
On here, and I second that.
I'm sorry, who was that?
John Hellbaker, Oro Valley.
Oh, John. Okay, thank you, John. All right, we have a motion and a second. We can do a roll call vote, or we can just, if there, do we have any, well, let's go for a regular. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Do we have any opposed? Okay, motion passes. So we will move forward with this as stated, where we will be looking at moving forward with the changes, but increasing our communication with the customers and asking them for feedback about how the rerouting is affecting their ability to travel on the 410. And with that, we've touched on all the items for today's meeting.
James, before you go,
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Jonathan here. Can we go back to agenda item 1 real briefly? I have one little question here.
Okay. Talking about this one?
Yeah, the programming and the applications.
Okay.
On the 5307, I believe it was, program, do we have a map of the service area that's included by federal requirements, or at least an identification of which routes are funded with 5307? So what part of the whole transit system is applicable to that funding category, in other words?
Yeah, I think probably the best thing to do would be to look in the tip and see what projects have been using that 5307. Offhand, I can tell you that to my knowledge, we're really not using it for any sort of operations. So it wouldn't be applicable to a specific route. 5307 is really more typically targeted toward capital and maintenance and things like that, and that's how our region has traditionally used it, for buying buses, for maintaining buses, for buying capital related items, and for doing trainings and things like that. So
is there a local match on that 5307 program?
Yes, the 5307 does require a match.
Of how much?
I believe, I always forget the exact number, so let me look it up before I give you something that's not right. If anybody knows off the top of their head, feel free to jump in there.
I think it's a 20-80 split.
Okay.
That's what.
In Oro Valley, we paid 20% local match for the vans we got.
Okay.
Hi, James. This is Carolyn Laurie.
Hi.
I believe that percentage is correct. 80% for the grant and 20% local match.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure that was the number. So yeah, I think it's somewhere. It's for most things. It's that there are some cases where the federal share might be 90%. I'm just looking at the website for vehicles related to equipment that are meant to be in compliance with the ADA Act or the Clean Air Act. It says that federal share may not exceed 50% of the net project cost of operating assistance. So if there were projects that were under operating, it would be 50% max federal share. So predominantly, Jonathan, as I'd said before, most of the projects, in fact, all the projects in my memory have been capital projects that have been that 80-20 split.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had for that issue.
Okay, great. So if there are no other questions, then we would move to adjournment. So I just need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
A motion, do we have a second?
Second,
Okay, that was Jonathan and
Anna.
Anna, okay. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time today.